Hello, everyone.
Hello, Father.
I can see everybody like Esther.
It is a good story, I'll tell you that.
Let us bow our heads in prayer. Father, teach us your word. Help us to love it and to obey it, so that we may be full of your joy and overflowing to a hurting and lost world. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, well, welcome to Bible study again, and we welcome those who are with us for the first time, and we welcome back those who have been with us before. So welcome, it's good to see you all. Now, we are going to be looking at the book of Esther. I hope everyone can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Yep, we can.
We're going to be looking at the book of Esther, and I would have said to you either yesterday, I think it was, the program, the schedule, or the syllabus, whatever you want to call it, for the study. Today, we're going to look at the basic overview and an introduction. We're going to have a basic overview and an introduction to the book of Esther. Next week, we will look at Queen Vashti, her being deposed.
Yeah, being killed, I would say too.
In chapter 1. And then the following week, we will look at Esther becoming queen and the plot uncovered, which is chapter 2. And then we will go down the whole list. Chapter 3, we will look at Haman's plot. Chapter 4, Mordecai persuades Esther to help. Chapter 5, Queen Esther's request to the king. Chapter 6, a sleepless night and Mordecai honored. Chapter 7, Haman is hanged. In chapter 8, King Xerxes' edict. And then the following week, which will be November the 24th, which is the eve of Thanksgiving, there will be no class. You'll be all doing your turkeys then and won't have any time for me. So we will have no class on November the 24th. And then on December 1st, we will have chapter 9, verses 1 to 17, which is about the Jews being triumphant, the Jews triumph. And then on the last day, December 8th, we will have the festival of Purine celebrating and Mordecai's greatness, which is Esther chapter 9, verses 18 to 32, and then chapter 10. And chapter 10 is a very short chapter, only 3 or 4 verses, I think it is.
Yeah, and Cambridge, what I was going to say, because I also have the Cambridge Bible, Father, is that the Cambridge Bible has covered more stuff for Esther. However, it covers all the way to chapter 13.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's a little bit different. It's a different translation, but
yes.
it's in the Greek translation, I would say.
Yes, yes. And then in December 15th, if we need an extra day, we will have an extra day just in case. But we should be able to finish this book before Christmas. Or at least not we should. We will finish the book before Christmas. And it will not be as long as the book of Revelation. So have no fear, everyone.
Oh, good. We're going to be doing something right around Hanukkah, they would say, because right now the Jewish people are celebrating, the Orthodox Jewish people are celebrating the holiday known as Sukkot.
Yes, yes, yes.
Which is the Feast of the Tabernacle that lasts us for 7 days. Very
true, Bryce. All right, let's get started. The book of Esther is, many see it as a mystery. It's like a suspense novel. It's almost like a movie that you can read or watch on television, a movie that you can watch on television, a novel that you can read, or something you can go into the theater and watch. It is a very easy read. It is very, and it's very short. It's not a long book. And so sometimes when you start to read it, you don't want to put it down. So if you haven't read the full book, try reading the full book and see how you have a feel for that book. It is an action-packed romantic drama and almost a comedy as well. And it's also a historical short story. Some people feel it's fictional, that it shouldn't, and there's always been wondering how come it got into the Bible itself.
Well, that's like the same thing like Nehemiah and Ezra too.
Yeah. It is an ironic tale of court intrigue. There's suspense, as I said. There's even the threat of lethal danger or genocide for the Jewish diaspora, and the possible annihilation of the people there. It is a tale of an orphan girl who becomes a queen, and she becomes one of the most powerful women in the Bible. And as you may have heard me announce, there are only 2 books in the Bible that are attributed to women, the other being Ruth, Esther and Ruth. The book is also concerned with the often unstable situation of a minority group. In this case, it's the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, who are living in a more dominant majority culture, which is the Persian Empire. And then we also find that through Esther's courage and creative actions and Mordecai's assistance, the Jews escape harm and they improve their status as far as living in Persia is concerned. Now, we have to remember that the Jewish people were captured and sent to Persia and in exile, and then they were able to eventually come out of Persia, but a remnant of them remain in Persia. And so people like Esther and Mordecai are part of that remnant that remain in the Persian Empire. Now, there are 2 Jewish heroes, Esther, who hides her identity, her Jewish identity, and it almost like in the same way that God hides himself in this book, and we will touch on that as we go through it. So Father, we find that. Hold on a minute, Bryce. Just hold on, okay? Just hold on. We find that Esther, as a Jew, did not let those in the Persian Empire know that she was Jewish, at least not at the beginning. The other notable Jewish hero is Mordecai, who is her cousin, but also was actually like an adopted father to her. Her father, Esther's father, was Mordecai's uncle, and so you find that Esther was more like an adopted daughter to Mordecai. He looked after her after the parents had died, and we find here that Mordecai is the one who actually gets the lives of the Jewish people that are in exile, that were in the remnant that remained in the Persian Empire. He was the reason why the Jewish people were endangered, because he refused to obey the king's law. And one of those laws were that he was supposed to bow before Haman, and he refused to do so.
Yeah, that's not really good, because it's like, that was like during the Second World War, like if the Jewish people or the Christian people actually decided to pray for the people that were getting executed and getting killed, if you did that, you would be killed as well too.
Okay. All right. And so so we find that those were the 2 major heroes, Jewish heroes in the book. Now, when it comes to who wrote this book and the date of the book, we do not know who wrote the book of Esther. But based on the evidence that we have, we know that we can make certain inferences as to who the author may be, and also the date that it was composed. And one of the things that scholars are clear about is that the author was a Jew. and we have been able to get that because there is emphasis on the origin of the Jewish festival Purine, which is a festival that commemorates the deliverance of the Jews of the Persian Empire from Haman's plot, his plot to kill them, to annihilate them. And so we find that the person knows very much about the origins of that festival. And we believe that since they do, the person would have been Jewish. But there's and we also have the whole Jewish nationalism being permeated through the book. But the author also knows about the Persian customs. Since the story of the book is set in the Persian city of Susa. And I will do a brief slide presentation afterwards, and you will see where that is in relation to to what part of the world that is today. And usually you can find a number of spellings for the word Susa, S-U-S-A, S-H-U-S-A, S-H-U-S-H-A-N, but it's the same city. Most of them will say S-U-S-A, Susa. It's a Persian city. It's a royal city, and it's part of modern day Iran, which is Iran today. So you could tell that although we hear so much turmoil in Iran and Iraq and these places, that was real prime biblical country in biblical days. I just missed someone. Oh, I think Rosa. Okay. So you will find there then that this ancient city of Susa was also the place where the prophet Daniel lived. We hear about Daniel. He also lived there prior to Esther, and also King Darius, who once reigned there. And as I said, I will show you the whole area and the countries today that made up the Persian Empire at the time. Now, some believe that the author was Mordecai, and he's a major character in the book. Some believe it may have been Ezra or Nehemiah, and we know that in the Old Testament, there are two books named after these two guys. They were familiar with the Persian customs, and they were Jews. But the book is being attributed to Esther, which tells you that she's the primary character in the book. We don't believe she wrote it, but she's a primary character in the book, and she's considered the Jewish heroine who is central to the turn of events that take place in the book. And as I also said, I think I mentioned that she is one of the books, or one of two, the other one being Ruth, that is named after a woman. Now, the book is a story. It has no recipient other than the readers who read it themselves. It would make sense that the story, because Esther was Hebrew or Jewish, that it was written for the Jews and for Hebrew people to read. So we believe that it was really written for the Jewish people primarily. However, the intended audience could have been much wider. And I'm a firm believer that the intended audience are for people like us as well, and I will explain that a little later. The earliest date for the book would be shortly after the events narrated, which would have been around 460 BC. This would have been before Ezra returned to Jerusalem. And also there's internal evidence that suggests that the festival of Purine had been observed for some time prior to the actual writing of the book. And we will come across that in chapter 9. And also too, there is belief that Xerxes had already died as well. King Xerxes had already died. So there are several scholars that have dated the book later than 330 BC. Because of the absence of Greek words and the style of the author's Hebrew dialect and all this sort of good stuff. And also too, that the book must have been written before the Persian Empire fell to Greece in 331 BC. Nevertheless, generally it is believed that the book was written sometime between 460 and 350 BC. The events recorded in this book are believed to cover a 10-year period during the reign of King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, which is always a name because your book might have it as King Xerxes. Some may have it as Ahasuerus, King Ahasuerus in theirs as well, but it's believed to be the same person. And he reigned between 486 and 465 BC. And historically, the events in the book of Esther occur between the 5th and 6th centuries of the book of Ezra. The location of the story is, as I said, let me see if I could pull that up now so that you can see where that is. Do I have that still? Let's hold on a second. No, wait a minute. Let me get out of this. Let me bring this up. Okay. Good. Oops. Now just give me a second. Can you all see that as yet, or no, you can't. I guess you can't. Just give me a second. Let's go here, right? Let's go here now. There we go. Share. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Good. Let me see. Good. You can see that, right?
Yep.
Good. Here you will see the Persian Empire. This was the Persian Empire back in the time of King Xerxes. And if you look and you will see the red going all around, that was the Persian Empire. Everything inside of that red line that looked something like, I don't know what you would call it, like a chicken leg with an extra piece of thing at the top. But that was the Persian Empire. So you can see today that the Persian Empire stretched all up to Moldova, which is up to the very far north, and Romania and piece of Bulgaria and Turkey and Armenia and Georgia and Syria and Iraq and down to Iran, where you will see the city of Susa is.
And also Russia.
And Pakistan, India, Afghanistan. We have parts of the Soviet, what used to be the Soviet Union. And we also have Jordan and Israel and Egypt and so forth. So you see, it is a vast amount of area, almost even touching a little piece of Kuwait. You got Bahrain and those places. So it was a large place, a large area, empire, and believed to cover over 170 different provinces at the time. And the three cities that you see there, Ecbatana and Persepolis, along with Susa, there were three royal cities. And by royal cities, I mean that the king had probably homes in them, and those were the places that he would usually be. Some may have even be his winter home or his summer home or whatever the case may be. But where Esther is based is in Susa. And so you see that there in the middle of the three stars. Now, the story takes place in the 3rd year of Xerxes' reign. However, Esther won the favor of everyone in the king's presence, which was in the 7th year of Xerxes' reign. And Mordecai and a lot of the Jews live in Susa, which seems close to Xerxes' palace because of this, the way we hear the speedy messages that were sent backward and forth between Mordecai and Esther. So we have that. And as I also said, that there were a number of provinces, over 100 provinces, and the Jews themselves were in about 127 of those different provinces. So they weren't only in Susa, but they were also the diaspora, as we can call them, or the remnant. They were all scattered throughout the empire. Now there are a number, and are there any questions as yet before I move on? Okay. Now there, did I hear someone's voice?
Alita has a question.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me, okay, go ahead, Alita.
Okay, so this really pertained to something you said earlier about they didn't know, they thought Esther had not written this book, but they weren't sure.
Mhm.
Was it common for Jewish women to be literate in those days?
Not, and that is that it wasn't.
Yeah.
And not only that, not even in terms of literacy only, but in those days, Jewish women would have been seen as property of the men. And so the same way children was, and the same way everything was. So it would not have been customary. I mean, but there were still prominent women, as you will see. Esther was, Ruth was. There was also the judge, Diana. Not Diana, but Diana was one of the daughter, Dinah, sorry, but the judge Deborah was one a very important person as well. But yes, and that is possibly the case at the time that she would not have been the one that had written it.
Deborah is mentioned in the book.
But she is. Hold on a minute, Brad. But she would have been the prominent person, the hero per se, that the book is being based. Yes, Bryce.
Deborah is mentioned in the book of Judges, I believe.
Yes, Deborah is. Yes, she was a judge. Correct. All right, let's move on. So there were a number of purposes for the book. The central purpose was to emphasize God's providence. God's providential care of a nation is evident throughout the book. And we know the Latin word for providence means foreseeing. It is a term that depicts God's continual care over his creatures, that he foresees what is taking place and he's there to care for them. So it includes God's preservation and his governing. So that's the first thing, and we will be touching on that quite a lot. The other thing, let me get out of this so that we'll come back to it again. Okay. The other thing is that another purpose of the book is that it records the initiation, the institution of the festival of Purine, which the Jews celebrate normally in March. And as I said, it keeps alive for the later generations to follow the memory of the great deliverance of the Jewish people during the reign of Xerxes from this destruction. And you will find that the festival of Purine is almost, and as I show you pictures, is almost like Mardi Gras. It's a very festive, colorful costume. You would have thought you went to Mardi Gras if you saw the festival of Purine. And you would also find that other themes that come out of the book, we have the theme of salvation. The author draws upon the diaspora that reoccurs throughout the book, the Bible. And also you will find that the events in the Persian city of Susa threaten the continuity of God's purposes in redemptive history, going all down to Jesus. There's also a comparison between the book of Esther, or the story of Esther, I should say, and the story of Joseph in Genesis. You will find that the author of Esther is patterned much off of the material on the events of the Joseph story, and we will see some of that playing out in the book. If you remember the whole history of Joseph and Esther, they were both Jews, and they both went to respective places. Joseph went to Egypt. Esther went to Persia, and they were exalted. They were humble people who were exalted to royal positions. Joseph becoming the number two in the Pharaoh's household, in the royal household. Esther becoming the king's wife. She became the queen. And what we also find too is the similarities between the two characters is that Joseph was able to bring temporary salvation to God's people by saving them from the famine, where Esther was able to save the people, the Jewish people, from this being destroyed, from being killed. And I note I said the temporal salvation because Jesus brought the ultimate salvation in the end when we get into the New Testament. And also, there's also that theme of humility versus exaltation, where we see people who were humble, like Esther and Joseph, became exalted. The same thing we see with Mordecai later on in the book. Humble people becoming exalted, but those who are not humble, who exalted themselves, were humbled. And we see that in the case of Haman, who wanted folks to bow down and worship him, so to speak, and then his demise is that of being hung. The same gallows that he prepared for Mordecai to get rid of Mordecai is the same gallows that he prepared for himself. And it gives us that whole notion, sometimes, like, what goes around comes around, we like to say sometimes. It is a kind of a pattern with Haman. There's a lot of eating and drinking and feasting and banquets in the book. The book has 10 chapters and it got 10 banquets. And again, that gives you an idea of and we go back, see how Revelation still helps you, is that we have the numbers playing here again, and the whole 10, which is a biblical number, a godly number. And we see, the 10 commandments, and now we have here these 10 banquets. And so feasting is another prominent theme in Esther. The banquets provide the setting for important plots to develop, and you will see some of them happening in the banquet. In the book, the story begins with 3 banquets. There's one for the elite of all the empire, and that banquet lasted, as the book says, 180 days. Can you imagine having a banquet for half a year? You're just eating and drinking as you like, and and the king is making merry in there. And then there's also a banquet for the people of Susa, and there was banquet for the women. Vashti had a banquet for the women while the king was having a banquet for the men, and so forth and so forth. So there are 10 of them, and we will identify each banquet as we go through the book as well. Now, there are 3 pairs of banquets that mark the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story, and they are particularly prominent. And there are 2 banquets given by King Xerxes, and there are 2 prepared by Esther. And then there's also the double celebration of Purine. And as I said earlier, a lot of these banquets and these events that were planned, and you can see the plots. Some of them, even you will read one about Esther, who invited Haman to a banquet, and she already had her plot where she will reveal who it was that will annihilate her people. And so we see that happening in some of these books. Yes, Iris.
I have a question. It was very, very wealthy. Where did all the money come from?
That is a really good question.
As you read the book, it's one lavish after another.
Yes. And the Persian Empire in that day was a wealthy place. There was no doubt. to tell you what was the commodity or the item that was promoting that much wealth. I'm not sure what that is. I mean, that is something that we can check out. Did you check that? Did you send me, Pam? There was a question that someone had this morning too that I was supposed to check. That was an important question. But
it was about Vashti.
no, that one was about Vashti. Okay. Because I would like to, I mean, you're asking some really good questions and I would like to check them out so I can come back and tell you what the answers to them. So I plan to do that for you, but I think that's a good, but there would have been, I'll come to you now, Lorraine, but I think there would have been some, obviously it was some commodity that was there that would have given rise to that amount of wealth that they had, but it was one of the wealthiest empires out. Yes, Lorraine.
Netflix has a very good movie called The Book of Esther that follows the Bible pretty well. It really shows all these parties and stuff too. It's a very good film. And
wait a minute, I missed your first part, Lorraine. What was the first part you said?
I said Netflix has a very good film
called Esther.
I have a Roku TV, so I picked it up there. But if you have a Netflix subscription, it's called The Book of Esther. And it's
also on Tubi too.
It follows the Bible pretty well. I'm sure. I mean, you're going to bring out other things.
Oh, no, if you all have that, that would be good to watch. That is good. I'm glad you mentioned that, Lorraine, because I will go and watch that because, yeah. I don't subscribe to Netflix, but I have Tubi, so I can watch it through that.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. So
yeah, I don't have Netflix either, so I can, but I have Tubi, although I can subscribe to it on Tubi instead.
Yeah.
And I have Pluto, so.
Now, there are a number of duplications in the book as well. You will see that that seems to be whoever wrote this book, that is one of the favorite techniques of the writer. In addition to the 3 groups of banquets, you'll see that there's 2 lists of the king's servants. There's 2 reports that Esther concealed her identity. There are 2 gatherings of women, 2 fasts, 2 consultations of Haman with his wife and friends, 2 unscheduled appearances of Esther before the king, and there's a whole lot of double duplications in the book. Now, one of the outstanding features of the book, or the most outstanding feature of the book, is the absence of the direct reference to God. There's no, the word God is not mentioned in the book. There's no even mention or direct mention of worship or explicit mention of worship or prayer or sacrifice, which is very much a part of who the Jewish people are, and you will find in the other books of the Bible. There's no mention of this directly at all in Esther, and this is where a lot of scholars and a lot of people have wondered, why is this book in the Bible? And they find it to be a very secular book. But again, you will find that although the book does not, and this is again, and for me, again, why I think it's important to have such a book like this, because for ourselves, for us as well, we look to see God directly, that when things happen to us in our lives and so forth, we want to know where God is, why we haven't heard from him, why we haven't seen him, why we haven't done, why we want a real direct presence of him, and we don't get that. But here in the book of Esther, you will find that things happen, and the way things happen is because of God's presence in the whole scenario. And our lives is that's how we live. Many a time we may not feel the actual presence of God or realize that God was involved in something that took place in us, and as I always like to say, every disappointment is a blessing in disguise. That a disappointment that has taken place down the road, you realize, oh, I needed to go through that to get to this point. And you find that that is prevalent in the book of Esther. So although God is not mentioned directly or explicitly, we will see the presence of God going through the book all the time. I told the group this morning that, sometimes we don't realize it. Even in my own life, where in terms of my own ministry, I have seen how God has taken me from one parish to another parish to another parish, all because he wanted me to end up somewhere. Now, I don't know why I've ended up in Jensen Beach yet, but hopefully he will let me know why I am here. But I have seen where he has taken me from different parishes, and the one before that was I needed to go to that parish so as to find myself in to prepare me for the next. And so it is always a, and you look back and you see how God works that way. So maybe you can even look back in your lives and see God where you are, and you got to a particular position and where you would have traveled, and see that God had a hand in making this happen. But you did not realize it then, but you can reflect on it and realize it now. And so you find that a lot in the book of Esther. Um, so in a nutshell, God's imprint is everywhere in the book. You could see his sovereign rule is assumed at every point. You can see that there's an assumption made all the more effective by the total absence of reference to him, that it becomes clear that God exercises his providential, his sovereign control over all the changes that are going on with his people in the book. And there is also the other feature where, although you don't see this up front, or you may not, I should say, you may not see this up front, but it is happening behind the scenes, where there's this ongoing struggle of Satan, of the devil, against what God wants, against the purposes of God. And we see this going on in the form of Haman, butting heads with Mordecai, butting heads with the Jewish people, and this ongoing struggle where the devil is having his time, his wrestling match with God and the purposes of God, I should say. And they all too will play out against the promise, Jesus coming as the promised Messiah. Any questions on what I've just said?
Nope.
Okay, now let's look at the four characters of the book. Well, the four main characters and then a fifth minor character. The four main characters of the book is the king, King Xerxes, Queen Esther, Haman, and Mordecai, and a more minor character is Queen Vashti. Now, King Xerxes, as we heard, is a ruler over 170 provinces, stretching even all down into India and right up to Moldova and so forth. He is presumably directly related to King Cyrus, who was the conqueror of the largest empire in the world until his time. And although Xerxes was king of the most powerful empire in the world, you find that for a man who has such power, he appears in the book of Esther as impulsive. And another impulsive person that we remember a lot is Simon Peter. Simon Peter was a very impulsive guy. He was always the first to answer and so forth, and he reacted quickly. You find the same way with Xerxes. In one such case is, when Vashti disobeys him, and the people who were surrounding him at this party told him, no, you got to banish this woman, because if you don't do it, other women will follow suit and start disobeying us as men. And then we got, that we got bare chaos. We cannot have that. And you will realize later on in the chapter that then after he does an edict, he does announce an edict, pronounce an edict, that he goes back and he wonders to himself, did I do the right thing with Vashti? And so you see this whole impulse that because the guy say you got to do something, he does something right away without thinking about it. And then afterwards, then he goes back and then he starts to think about it and wonders if he did the right thing. So you find that he has an impulsive nature. Obviously, he loves life. He loves a lot of merrymaking. So he hosts a lot of banquets. He likes a lot of eating and drinking. And whoever comes to these banquets, he has all out there. They can drink as much wine as they want, eat as much food as they want. I guess this food was flowing out from heaven, man, because he had real food for 180 days for one of these banquets. But he was also a man who enjoyed his sexual activity, which is the reason why you will find that Vashti, as I go through the characters, why she was banished. And so Xerxes showed his wealth by his large parties that he threw in times of celebration. And we will see that he loved to display his wealth in the Esther story. And as I was saying, that due to the fact that his first wife or his ex-wife Queen Vashti disobeyed his command, he refused for refusing to appear before him and his drunken friends. The friends felt that he needed to do something about it so that there's not a rebellion of all the wives in the kingdom. I don't personally think that all the wives would have rebelled. There are a lot of them will not stand up to the men anyhow. But the thing about it is, you might have had a few who would. And so
they killed her, you're saying?
Yes, Iris.
As I read the book, it reminded me of Farouk, King Farouk. Do you remember King Farouk? Any of you? There was the huge king, very, very fat. He was deposed, and in fact, they killed him. King Farouk. And this whole book reminded Xerxes of him because he was always having banquets and had all the women. I mean, obviously not. I think he even had.
Now, where is King Farouk from?
From Persia. Charlotte Persia.
Oh, okay.
King Farouk, yeah.
Yeah, yes. Okay, I understand what you mean. Okay. Yes.
They're no more now.
Well, maybe that's how the Persians were. They like to party.
He was so fat, and you know, move. But obviously, with all these banquets. So I think Xerxes like that.
Yeah, and Xerxes is a king who loved his merrymaking. He really loved to party. At the same time, you know, it makes you wonder again, how did he able to control such a large kingdom with all? But it's possible too that he was one of these kind of guys who was not in control as you think he might have been either. Although there are views that he was a great king and all of that good stuff, but he just loved to party. So you were going to say something, Bryce?
Yeah, it's just that why wasn't God ever mentioned in the books like Nehemiah or Ezra or Esther? Why wasn't God ever mentioned it? Is there a reason?
And the only reason that we can find to that is that it was a deliberate thing by whoever wrote the book to show that we don't have to have God directly mentioned to know that God is there.
So what you're saying is like they just didn't. So we don't have any direction why why God was never mentioned in the three books from Ezra to Esther.
Well, no. It wasn't in Ezra and Nehemiah. That is not. It's only in Esther that we are talking about.
Yeah, it was only in Esther, right?
Correct. It's only in Esther, and so we believe the writer of Esther would have deliberately done that to show that you don't have to have the word God mentioned or to hear the word God mentioned to know that God is in control, that God is providing for his people. And that is where too I'm going to emphasize that a lot because, as I said earlier, oftentimes we wonder where God is, but God is always here. But even when we don't think he is here, he's always here. It is just that we are unable to connect the dots as to show how God has been on a journey step by step with us all the time when we are going through, whatever it is that we are going through. So scholars will tell you that they believe that this was a deliberate ploy by the writer not to mention God in the book. Okay, then we have Queen Esther. As you know, Queen Esther is the heroine of the book. She's the most fully developed character in the book. She starts off with being just a simple maiden, and she rises to the position of queen and delivering her people. She becomes, as I think the deacon said this morning, he said she's another Messiah, and I say she's another Messiah-like character, because Jesus delivered the people, and so she did the same thing, and also Jesus put his life on the line for them, for these people, and she was also willing to put her life on line for her people. She was Mordecai's cousin, as I said. Her father was Mordecai's uncle, and she was known for her beauty, and she would have been one of the women who would have spent 6 months, purifying themselves and making themselves beautiful for whenever it was their chance for the king to call them. And it is possible that she could have had intimacy with the king on a previous occasion. And the thing is about it is, that Esther would have gone to the king for probably a night, and the norm was a night with the king, and then you were back into the harem as a concubine. That's how it worked. Her Persian name is Esther, but her Jewish or Hebrew name is Hadassah, and we will come across that in the book. But she didn't use Hadassah, her Jewish name, because if she had used that, they will know that she's not Persian. So she used Esther, which was her Persian name. Her adopted father, Mordecai, had told her not to reveal her Jewish parentage, and we will see that in chapter 2. It is unclear why Mordecai insists that she was to withhold her religion, other than that Haman there does not appear, but we don't really know. It is possible that because of Haman's anger over Mordecai's refusal to bow before him, that could have been a reason for it. But it doesn't appear in the book that there was this general feeling of anti-Semitism. So we don't really know why he asked her not to reveal herself. Now we get to, as we know, Esther became queen, and she was chosen from all the women in the harem, and she will be the one who would eventually lead. She will be the one who will realize Haman's demise. Then we got Haman, who's the third main character of the book. One of the things about Haman is that he was a descendant of King Agag, and Mordecai was a descendant of King Saul and Saul's father Kish. And so it is quite possible that these two guys were in some kind of a family feud, a descendants feud, long before they were even born. And so it just continued down the line. So so we have Mordecai versus Haman. Haman is an enemy of the Jews, He was elevated to a higher seat of command than the nobles were by Xerxes, and he did not like Mordecai because Mordecai refused to kneel in his presence or to bow in his presence. And then we come to Mordecai, who is the last of the four main characters. And I've told you a bit more about him already, so you know you will see a whole lot more of him as we go through the book. But he will move from being a humble man, and he will rise to prominence. He will be exalted by the end of the book. And then the fifth person, who is more minor in the book, is Queen Vashti. She's the queen that precedes Esther, and she's portrayed as a woman of integrity, in my opinion, at least, because she refused to allow her husband to allow her to go in front of all these folks, most likely in the nude, and to parade and to dance in front of them. In fact, one person once said that concubines and prostitutes were supposed to parade before these drunken feasts, not queens. And so Queen Vashti refused her husband's wishes to come and to show herself to him and to the friends that he had there, which led to her banishment as queen and Esther taken over. And again, as I say, again, it shows again that that Vashti had to step aside so that Esther could come in. Again, you see the whole notion of the whole presence of God, because Vashti could not have done for the Jewish people what Esther could do. And so we see that happening. Are there any questions?
Nope.
Okay, let me just show you a couple of slides. And so that's an overview of the book that we'll be studying, and I hope it will be interesting and we can learn a lot from it. But let me show you a couple of, share a couple of slides. You can see that again, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So as I said, this is the Persian Empire at the time of Xerxes. It's a huge place. Just think about all these places now having their own governments and everything. Obviously, there were not as many people living back then as there are now, but just to tell you the whole mass geographical area of and you could see it. I didn't even mention Ethiopia, but you could see if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, it goes all down into Ethiopia, which is south of Egypt, and so forth. So it was a really vast place.
I have a question.
Yes, Lorraine.
How can I get a copy of this map showing it like that?
This map?
Yeah,
Oh, I can send it to you. That's fine.
okay, thanks.
I'll send it to all of you.
It'll be in the recording, right?
It will be in the record. This should be in the recording, right, Pam?
I want to be able to copy it, to have a hard
I think
copy.
sending it out makes sense. It'll
Yeah, I
be
will
in the
send it out.
recording, but it'll be easier if you send it out.
Yeah, I'll send it out.
Thank you.
Now, this is another map which shows you parts of the places again in the same area where you hear in the Bible, if you remember the story of Pentecost, where people were speaking in their different languages, the Medes and the Parthians and all of that. You see that all here. You see Susa again there next to Awan. If you know the Old Testament very well, you will know that the Jewish people were exiled in Assyria, they were exiled in Babylonia, they were exiled in Persia, and you see those areas all shown there. You see Babylon is mentioned, is up there in Kish, and you see Nineveh that we talk about, Jonah, which is to the far north, left-hand corner. So you get a feel of this is the area that in the Euphrates River. You have a feel of where the people, where that part of the Bible, what that area was like, and you just saw what it is today. Now, this is a kind of another chart that shows about Esther and how the book is. It's a little bit different to mine, but it sends the same kind of message. God's providence among his people during hard times and happy times. You see the king's banquet, honoring the kingdom, honoring the new queen, which is Esther. And that is seen in chapters 1 and 2. You have Haman's edict in chapter 3. You have the queen's courage, which is Queen Esther's courage. Urging of Mordecai approaching the king, Xerxes in chapters 4 and 5. And then you see God's deliverance, where Mordecai is honored and Haman is hanged. And you see that in chapters 6 and 7. And that's the seen as the hard times. And then the happy times follow with Mordecai's edict in chapter 8, the Jews rejoicing in chapter 9, enemies destroyed, the feast of Purine is established. And then chapter 10 is shalom, peace on the Jewish people. And you see the circumstances, there was threat and trust, and there was deliverance and praise. You see the mention of feasts, which is a very important part of the book. The feasts that were by the king, by Queen Esther and the nation. You see the dates here of the period which this all took place. Now, don't confuse this with the dates of the writing of the book, but these are the dates 483 BC to 473 BC of when this actual thing would have taken place. Remember, I said earlier, it's a 10-year period, and there we have that 10-year period. The theme is the sovereign accomplishments of God's purposes through ordinary people and apparent coincidences, which I like to call God incidences. But you see how God's purpose is being done through ordinary people like Esther and Mordecai, and how he is in the midst of it all. Then there's a key verse, chapter 4, verse 12 to 16 and 10:3, where Esther is willing to perish for the people. And then we see the whole notion of Christ in Esther. She is that whole Messiah-like personality where she advocates for her people, and she's even willing to die just the same way Christ died and was willing to die and did die for his people. The good thing about Esther, she didn't die. She didn't die. She was able to conquer and to triumph. Here is the king's, here's in Susa, which would have been the king's apartments. I cannot tell if this is present day, but it would have been at least some time ago, where King Xerxes would have part of the kingdom and part of the palace of his time. And you see the word Susa is spelled here differently, Shushan. Here we have the main characters, and you could tell on their faces what they're like. You see Mordecai, he's like about to pull his hair out of his head. Obviously, knowing full well that his people are about to be killed, and oh gosh, how am I going to stop this from happening? You see Esther is there. I can't read her face at this point, but obviously she might be scared as to how am I going to face the king, because in those days you didn't go to the king unless the king summons you, and here is this woman who went into the king without being summoned. So obviously Mordecai wanted her to do stuff to save the people, and you can see a little bit of fear on her face, because how am I going to make this all happen? Then you see here Ahasuerus, King Xerxes, who you could tell he had wealth. You could see the rings on his finger, and his hands are there, and sometimes it's like again when you look at him, you wonder, well, what next? What am I going to do? I want another party. I want another banquet. That's what keeps me going and sane, probably. But there is Xerxes. Vashti is upset because the king has called her over to, and I mean, this upset could be two things. He's called me over to parade myself in front of these drunken people, and I'm not doing it. So she has her hands folded and she's crossing her face. It could be that because she's banished as queen, she's upset about that too. But you could see that. And then we have Haman, who you could see as the terminology is being used. He's like devil he's like the devil himself. His old face, you could tell he's an evil man. He doesn't like what Mordecai not bowing to him, and he's wondering, how am I going to get rid of this man? I like the 2 points that comes up off his thing, because he looks like some Dracula kind of guy, ready to
suck someone's blood.
Ready to devour whoever he can.
I have a
Here's
question.
yes, Lorraine. Go ahead, Lorraine.
How come the king is referred to as Xerxes?
Xerxes. He's supposed to be the same. Some biblical translations have Xerxes. Like I know, for example, the NIV uses the word Xerxes. I think the New Revised Standard Version use Ahasuerus, but it's the same individual.
Oh, okay. That
It
was
is the
it.
same.
The other thing too, it was my understanding that the queen was banished after she refused to present when they came for her, and because he was a drunk, and she didn't want to go through that one more time, and because it was a law that if she refused him, then she had to be banished.
Right, because she refused him is the reason why she was banished, and the reason for banishing her was because they did not remember. He did not. The king didn't do it on his own free will. He was coerced by his people to do so, because if he didn't, it will set a precedence that women now can disobey their husbands, and they did not want to have that. So did I answer what you were trying to say? I'm not sure. Lorraine.
Yeah, I thought you.
Or you were just making a comment. Go ahead.
No, I thought before that you said that she was banished before she refused to go. But
oh no! She was banished after she refused to go. She was banished after she refused to go.
It was a law that she had to be.
Yeah, it is. She refused to go, and that's what led to the whole banishment of her. This is probably would have been Queen Esther's Purine costume. Obviously, she's the queen, so she wouldn't dress up like some of us who would have dressed up in other costumes. She still had to look a little bit regal. So she would have gone out in her crown and in nice looking jewelry and looking as regal as ever as the queen of Persia. So now this is the festival of Purine. Now, when I tell you it looks like Mardi Gras, it looks like Mardi Gras. And it's colorful. There's a lot of costumes and floats and all this sort of stuff. It is a real festive celebration. And it depicts that, we could have been all wiped out. So why not give thanks to God that we have survived? So we have here the festival of Purine. Yes, Alita.
Where do they celebrated this elaborately in the world? Is this Israel?
I cannot tell you exactly that this picture is in Israel, but they do celebrate it in Israel. This one here would have been in Israel. This next picture here would have been in Israel. You could even see like this kid is still dressed up like a Jew, white shirt and black pants, and he has what is Zuccato? Oh gosh, help me.
It's either called the yarmulke or a kippah. Jeff was
the kippah. The kippah. Yes.
stuff.
Yes, but there's another word for it that I'm looking for and I can't remember. Because when you go to Jerusalem, when you go like to the Wailing Wall in Israel, you have to wear one as a man. If not, you cannot. They have them there, you know, like how we have masks now put for people who don't come with a mask on. Oh gosh, I'm getting really forgetful. The word that I wanted is really yarmulke. The yarmulke. The yarmulke is what I was looking for. If you don't wear the yarmulke on your head, you cannot go to the Wailing Wall because you, as a man, you must cover your head. Now, some Jewish men go to it with the hats that they wear, and that's fine, but your head must be covered. But yes, here you see here again, you can see here another kind of costume. They have this little boy. He looks like if he's dressed like King Xerxes, walking with a crown on his head and this robe on his back, and he's walking with probably with his sister. Here again, we see again the whole Purine celebration is so festive and colorful. It's like carnival, or as we say, like Mardi Gras. Now, no one knows if this is true or not, but I saw this picture, which is believed to be the tomb where Queen Esther and Mordecai may have been buried. As I said, some people think the book is fictional. Some people think it's real. Nobody knows for sure. But this is believed to, or is marked as the possible site of the tomb. This is inside of the tomb. As well. So it's become more or less like a museum for people to go and visit and to see. So,
Israel? Where is that?
I'm not hearing you clearly, Iris. Say that again.
What country is it in?
He's asking where this tomb is.
Oh, in Susa. In Susa.
So that would be in Iran.
In Iran. Yeah, in Iran. So that's where it is. So it will be it's going to be an interesting conversation and discussion on Esther and how we could apply it to our lives. So next week we will look at Vashti being deposed and in the context of Xerxes' first banquet. And so we will look at chapter 1. So I will say read chapter 1 for next week. And as I said, it's better to read a whole book if you can. If you can read a whole book, read a whole book. But we'll be focusing on chapter 1 next week. Any questions? Yes, Pam.
Father, you do have a couple questions that you said you might want to investigate, but maybe in the future you want to assign them out and somebody can come back and report, so you don't have to do it all.
Good that. Yes, I like that. Thank you, Pam. I'm
going to ask for volunteers, and maybe somebody can.
Can you tell us what the questions are?
Yes, I can.
Right. Tell us what the questions are and see who wants to do which one.
So the first one is, if we can figure out what happened to Vashti, and in specific, when they said banished, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And more generally, what happened to women who disobeyed their husbands during that time? Mm-hmm. Yes. Anybody volunteer to take that one on?
Oh, Roseanne.
Perfect.
I'll take the second question.
Which is?
What happened to women who disobeyed their husbands at the time?
During that time.
Okay, perfect. I'll take the Vashti one. I'm interested in that.
Yes.
And then today or this evening, we had the question of where did the king's wealth come from? He was considered extremely wealthy. Where did that wealth come from?
Yes.
I'll say that.
Lorraine wants to take that?
Yeah, I was trying to find it in a book I have right here, but it's not there. So.
Oh, who said they wanted to take that?
Alita did.
Oh, Alita. Alita will take that. Wonderful.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Wonderful.
That was a good question.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book called The Rise of Western Christendom, and I thought it might be in there.
Yeah.
So,
The first two questions came out of this morning, and now this one this evening. And Pam, that is an excellent idea. I thank you. You care about me. Thank you. You love and care about me. So thank you so much. That saves me from doing that. Yes, Carol.
So I have a question. I noticed in one of the Purim photos, there was the inclusion of some butterflies. Do butterflies have any significance to Purim?
Oh, there's another question. I don't know.
Would you like me to
Yeah,
try to
do.
change that
Please
one?
do. You please do. Please do. This is exciting. Please do. Please do.
This isn't a question, it's just I guess it's a comment / question. Jeff's Jewish, he recently converted to Christianity, but I know a little bit about Judaism from being with him for the last couple of years. There's these little, at Purim parties, there's these little triangular shaped cookies, and they're called Haman. They're shaped like a triangle, and it's folklore that they're supposed to be little pieces of Haman's ears, because legend has it that they when they killed him, they cut his ears off.
What?
For Christmas goods, they'll make Haman cookies.
Oh my golly. I wonder why. I have not read up a whole lot of on Purine. I know when it happens and the reason for it and so forth, but the Jewish has a whole lot of festivals that have a lot of meaning and symbolism in them. So it's good. And I mean, if anybody wants to find out more about Purine, that would be great as well. If somebody wants to check that out a little bit more and see, but I'm happy to hear that. Did you know why? I mean, it would be interesting to know why his ears of all things, and you know.
I guess when they slayed him, that was the easiest thing to do. They just cut off his ears and saved them for souvenirs.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that is interesting. That is very interesting.
I used to make the cookies for a couple, 2 or 3 years. They never turn out right though. You're supposed to fill them with jam.
Yes. One.
That's disgusting.
Thank you, Roseanne. Lorraine?
yeah, I want to know, what is the time frame again for this king?
The time frame for the king?
Yeah.
He reigned between, well, you mean when he reigned or the story itself?
Oh, is there a difference?
Yes, there is. There is a difference.
I was thinking of historically.
You see, the story, let me show you. I showed you here, the story.
Yeah,
You see, the story is from 483 to 473 when this all happened.
Okay.
The king, now that's a 10-year period. If my mind serves me correctly, the king reigned for about 20 years.
Okay.
Oh, I can't hear you, Pam.
He reigned from 486 to 465 BC.
Right, 19 years, 20 years, right. He reigned for about 20 years. And then we have then the other dates where the so he started, as I said earlier, he would have started 3 years. This whole thing started 3 years after his reign, because he's 486 and this starts from 483 BC. But then you also then have when the book was written, which was after this time as well. So there are different dates. Yeah, but Xerxes reigned for 19-20 years. Yes, he did. Okay, any other questions?
Oh, just
Yes,
another story about the triangles is it represented the hat of Haman. I think that's a little nicer way of saying it.
Interesting.
They'll read the book, like in the synagogue, they will read the whole book of Esther on the night before Purim.
Purine, yes.
About maybe a half hour to read through it. And every time they come to the word King Haman in the scriptures, they use noisemakers and they say boo, and it's like,
I heard about that. That I heard about. Yes, I heard about that. Yes.
and then like food. Oddly enough, they also tell you to drink alcohol during, they actually kind of want you to get a little bit drunk.
There's
while when we're doing this, we could come with our glass of wine. So we could do that.
You'll see him like in the movie. If you watch the movie, you'll see him as falling down drunk.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I would encourage folks, if you have Netflix or you have Tubi, to watch that. I am going to go. Actually, I'm going to go and investigate it after I'm finished here, just to see, because I would like to watch that even before. Yes, Pam.
Father Tony, Bill and I were talking on Sunday about how it might be fun to start to do some movie nights. And this would be a great one to do.
Correct.
If somebody's got it on their phone, Netflix on their phone, we can sling it to the big TV screen in Hogue Hall. That
would be nice. And that would be good to do that during this time that we're doing the study in the book as
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. I don't know how long the movie is, but we can look into that if that's interesting to people.
Yeah.
Like
Lorraine,
maybe we do it like right after the end of the movie, right after the end of the session.
Right after, you mean a night session, or you mean the session of the Bible study?
Like in mid-December.
Oh, so in fact, we could make the 15th the movie night.
Yeah.
That's the extra day. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. Just an idea.
No, I love that idea. I'm coming to you, Louise. Lorraine, you have you said you have watched it, correct?
Yeah.
Was it 2 hours long about?
I don't think it was that long.
But it was more than an hour?
Oh, yeah. It was like
Okay.
a full length. And there were
But probably an hour and a half. It was probably an hour and a half.
TV. Actually, that's where I may have seen it. I'm not sure. But well, sometimes on the Roku TV, the Netflix and others you have to pay for. But I have a subscription where I get a disc that I send back and then get a new one, and that's $8 a month. So if I can't get it there, I'll order it through the mail and watch it. But there was a whole lot of biblical figures, and during Lent there were some very good films on biblical people.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I think that would be a good idea to do. So remind me of that, Pam. I think that's a really excellent idea.
Yep.
That we could use the 15th and that extra day for the show to do the movie. Yes, Louise.
It's on YouTube also.
Oh, it is on YouTube also?
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half, hour
Right.
and 40 minutes.
Yeah, I think it will be about an hour and a half without commercials. So that's because really and truly, it's the commercials that make these things 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's really an hour and a half, really. So yes, I think that would be great. So yeah, let's do that. I think that will be great. All right. Well, we've gone a little longer than I expected tonight, but I think it was really good, and I like the conversation and the discussion that is coming out. So that works well. That works well. So next week you'll come back and you will. Oh, how do you think, Pam, that we can the responses that they come up with for next week? How do you think we could share that with the morning group? Unmute yourself, please.
I was going to send out an email using your email list, just reminding people what they agreed to do. I know, Roseanne, you're coming. Are you planning on doing the morning or the evening?
Oh, this coming Sunday?
No,
Yeah,
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Week
It
Wednesday.
depends on Jeff's work schedule.
Okay.
Yeah, either or.
So maybe what we do is we ask everybody who took a question to, write 1 or 2 paragraphs, not a dissertation, just 1 or 2 paragraphs. And they share it verbally with the class that they attend, but somebody else can read it out loud for the other class. Like I could do it, or you could do it.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, my advice would be then is to, as Pam just said, the couple of paragraphs that you write on it, you can send it to Pam and to me, and so that we will have it for the other class as well. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Have a glass of wine and your first banquet. You know, and as I said, you could bring some food and wine every time there's a banquet in Esther, you know, so we have a feel for the merriment of King Xerxes. So, and in chapter 1, I think there were 3 banquets, so you may need 3 glasses of wine. So I hope that you'll enjoy the book, read it, and we'll come back and talk about it. Any questions that you have that I cannot answer, that we will get you. You'll work through and get those answers. Okay. Thank you so much, Pam. Thank you so much for recording and for live stream and for Zooming, hosting for us. Greatly appreciated. Have a good night, everyone. See you on Sunday. God
Night.
bless. Enjoy
Okay.
the rest of your week. God bless.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.